What's up, YouTube? Welcome to ZigTech Solutions. I'm so glad you're here. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be learning a lot about Microsoft Excel. We're going to be learning about VBA automations, VBA user forms, chart creation, data visualization, pivot tables, complex formulas, anything you can think of about Excel, we're going to try to learn it. We're first going to focus on VBA automation. So taking a repetitive task from either your job, if it's a hobby or a specific project, we're going to try to automate as much of that using VBA. So without wasting any more time, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be learning the very basics of how to set up a module, how to write a simple procedure, and how to set some values inside of a sheet. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're obviously going to need is Excel. So let's go ahead and open up a blank Word or blank Excel document. The next thing that we need to do is we need to enable the developer tab. So as you see up here, there is no developer tab. So without that, we wouldn't be able to write any VBA. So the first step that we need to go through is go to File on the left side. We're going to go down to Options, and then we're going to select the Customize ribbon. And then on the right pane, we're going to scroll down, and you'll see this Developer tab here, and you'll see that it's unchecked. So we'll go ahead and check that, and we'll say OK. So now, as you'll see up in the top of our screen here, we now have a Developer tab, which is where we can go in and start writing our modules. So let's go ahead, and what we first need to do is select this Visual Basic, which is going to pull up blank canvas. Doesn't really look like much right now. As you'll see in our left pane here of our project, we have VBA Project Book 1, which is just the name of the current workbook. So if it said Zach George, it would be VBA Project Zach George Excel file. Okay, so I'm going to actually split my screen here so that you guys can see both the pane, the Excel document, and the VBA pane, so you can see both at the same time. So the first step that we need to do is we need to insert a module, and the modules are what are going to hold our subroutines, our functions, and anything that we define that we want to run or execute through VBA. So what we're going to do is we're going to right-click in this pane here. We're going to say Insert, and then we're going to go to Module. So another blank screen, doesn't look like much yet. The first thing that we need to keep in mind when we're writing a subroutine is we need to start the subroutine with the word sub. So we're going to say sub, we'll just call it practice, open parenthesis and then close parenthesis. And then when we hit enter, typically it'll end our sub for us, which this end sub has to be in here in order for this to execute. But if it doesn't, you can just go ahead and write end sub in there. So good. Okay, so now what we need to do is we're going to work on, or we're going to learn what a dim variable means. So what we're going to do is we're going to define different variables and their different data types. So the first thing we want to define is the actual workbook that we're in, the workbook that we're going to be referencing. So we're going to say dim active workbook as workbook. What this means is it's saying, okay, this variable, active workbook, is defined as a workbook. The next thing we want to do is we want to specify we want to dim the sheet that we're going to be referencing. So in this case, it'll be sheet 1, you'll see down here, and we'll define that here in a second. But we have to say dim active sheet as worksheet, and boom. So now we have active workbook is defined as a workbook, active sheet is defined as a worksheet. So now we need to actually set those values. So we're going to say set active workbook equal to workbooks application dot this workbook dot name, which is saying, okay, I want to set this value with this here, which is saying the active workbook is going to be the current workbook that's open. We want to get the name of it, and that will set the value of active workbook. Okay, so we can reference in the code later on this workbook that we want to essentially talk with or interact with. So now we're going to define the sheet that we want to work with. So we're going to say set active sheet equal to, well, if the workbook is the parent, the sheet will be underneath it. So we're going to say, okay, well, I want to use the active workbook, and then I want to get the worksheet that is named Sheet 1 in this case. So as I mentioned before, Sheet 1 is the name of the workbook that we have here, or the worksheet that we're referencing. Okay, so now, you'll see this in a little bit, when we want to reference, let's say, cell A1, we just need to reference active sheet, and it'll know that we want to reference this workbook and we want to reference this specific sheet. Okay, so you'll see how that plays out here in a second. So let's just say, for example, we want to set a value inside of A1, and we'll give it a string value. We'll say, we'll just put the word hello in there. So we're going to, in order to do that, we need to first reference the sheet that we're working in. So active sheet. Okay, we're going to say range, which is how you define the column and row value that we're interested in. We're going to say A1, close parenthesis, dot value equals, we'll just say hello. Okay, so now it's saying in active sheet, which is this sheet here that we've defined, I want to set the cell A1 value with the word hello. So if we go ahead, and now if we want to execute this subroutine, what we need to do is we need to just put our cursor in here somewhere. It doesn't really matter. And then there's this little play button up here. And if we click the play button, we hit run, and bam, it set our value to hello. So if I just come in here and I change this to A2, I execute it again, it is now in A2. So very simple to set the values. And now there's not much practicality to this. You're like, well, I don't want to just write words to different cell values, but these are all just basic concepts of how we can apply them to much larger, bigger scale things. So, and we'll learn those later on. Okay, so great. So let's do one more. Let's just go ahead and we're going to let's set a number value, an integer, to cell B1. So we're going to say active sheet dot range. We're going to say B1 dot value equals the number 1. Good. So let's go ahead and execute this again. And now what it's going to do, it's going to still execute this row, and so it'll just replace this one. So I'll go ahead and actually delete these so you can see it happen. If we go ahead and execute this now, it's going to set the value of A2 to hello, and then it's going to set the value, the B1 range with the number 1. Awesome. So now let's say we want to increase B1 by 1. So we're going to say, okay, active sheet, which is the sheet that we're referencing. We want the range B1 dot value is going to be equal to itself plus 1. So we have to do active sheet dot range B1 dot value plus 1. So this is saying, okay, in cell B1, we want to take the current value that's already stored in there and we want to increment it or just add 1 to it. So when we go ahead and hit play, it'll go to 2. Awesome. Okay, so we've learned the basics of defining a workbook, defining a sheet that we want to reference, and then we've set some various random values into those cells. One other thing that I want to cover with you is the importance of commenting in your code. What a comment does is it allows you to go back in the future, or if you hand this project off to another person, it allows you to basically narrate what's going on in the code. So we can write lines of comments that won't be executed by the console. So if we start a line with a single quotation and we just say dim variables, you'll see that it grays this out. And what that means is that this is a comment. So when this subroutine is executed, it will not execute this line because it knows that it's a comment. So very important. Now this comment's very bland. It doesn't really mean much. But we could say here, set value of A2 to the word hello. So now in the future, when you come back and you maybe see an error in your code or something, you can go find where, oh, this line is where I'm setting that value to be the word hello. So very important to comment your code with good thorough comments, easy to understand. It'll be very helpful for you in the future. And again, if you hand this project off to another person, it could be very helpful for them. So awesome. Well, we covered the first piece of the VBA, setting up a module, writing a simple subroutine, referencing a workbook, referencing a sheet, and then setting some random values. Thank you guys for joining ZigTech Solutions here. As you saw, we quickly went over how to set up a VBA module to accomplish some very basic tasks. Next week, we're going to go over to a little bit more advanced. I think we're going to be talking about for loops. So very powerful, very intuitive, very easy to write, and I hope you guys can learn something from this series. Thanks, guys.